So once again, welcome everyone. My name is Anuradha Sant and I'm privileged to be your host for the day. The topic for today is the neuroscience of coaching alchemy, science behind the magical process of coaching transformation. And we feel this is such an important topic because as coaches, an understanding of the brain and the mind allows us to partner with our clients more effectively and harness the brain's extraordinary power of transformation at multiple levels, be it at the beliefs, the thinking, emotions, and results and learnings. So the learning goals for today really would be to understand how the science of the brain is linked to the art of coaching. And that I'm sure will be a very beautiful insight that we will take away. And also we'll learn how the whole brain thinking facilitates insights, learning, and action. And to take us through this is none other than our expert, Dr. Colleen Lightbody. We are privileged and honored to have her back with us this time as well. She is the owner of BrainWise, Mastery Through Neuroscience. She's a respected coach, trainer, and speaker internationally. Her global experience includes clients in the Asia Pacific region, the United States, Europe, as well as Africa, and I can say the entire world. There are lots of followers and fans of yours, Colleen. Her specific area of expertise lies in neuroscience, mindfulness, brain-based learning, personal and professional coaching, and emotional intelligence. She is becoming known as the brain guru through her writings in the various blogs and magazines, as well as television and radio interviews. In addition to a private global coaching practice, Colleen has over 15,000 hours, mind you, 15,000 hours of training and coaching experience working with personal, professional, and corporate clients. Colleen has a master's degree in leadership through the University of Johannesburg, as well as a postgraduate diploma in neuro leadership through Middlesex University and a PhD in mindfulness and leadership. A positive and energetic style reflects the passion she has for her career and people, as well as a life living her core purpose for being a catalyst for change. There are also a lot of fun and energetic facts about Colleen. She has climbed the Kilimanjaro and the Everest Base Camp. She has provincial colors in both cycling and triathlon, competing 3 Ironman challenges and many long distance cycling races and ultra marathons. Wow, Colleen, that's very, very inspirational. Colleen walks the walk of personal mastery. She has achieved respect and credibility in her career and her personal life. And she is in demand as an accomplished and inspirational motivational speaker. And if you haven't heard her TED Talk, I would really invite you to do that because she received a standing ovation for that particular TEDx event. So with that, I won't take a moment further. I invite you and welcome you, Colleen, and it's over to you.
Thank you, Anuradha, and I'm very honored and privileged to be at the end of your first journey. It's a great honor to be here today. And it's also a great honor to be sharing with all of you my passion for neuroscience and coaching. And really, when I always talk about why do we bring neuroscience into coaching, because I know it's kind of a popular thing to talk about right now, but I always say it's about bringing the science of the brain to the art of our conversations, our coaching conversations. So I thought it was a fairly cool, if I may use that word, topic to think about the art of coaching from a magical point of view, from an alchemical point of view. And so what you'll see is I kind of really overuse the metaphor today, and I'm going to have a whole lot of fun with magic and spells and wizardry and sorcery and alchemy. Please be reassured if any of you are alarmed right now that I'm not really into any kind of peculiar or alternative kind of mystical things. However, as a metaphor for understanding and getting a little bit of energy and fun into the neuroscience and into coaching, I thought it was going to be something that we could really play with today. So I'm also, I love engaging with people. I love to hear from you. And I'm very happy if any of you bring in your questions as we go along. Raise your hand if you want to, and please put questions in the chat. I'll try to manage the chat, but I've also got a lot of support on the side. If there's anything that you guys, Tashima and Radha, Amlesh, that you feel is relevant, then please do add that in. Good. So I'm talking about the neuroscience of coaching alchemy and this magical process of coaching transformation. And I've kind of divided into 5 key aspects. I'll talk to you about the word alchemy and linking it to coaching. I'm going to be talking about neuroplasticity, okay, which I'm sure you all are familiar with, but we'll give you a little bit of a different take on neuroplasticity today. So I've called it neuroplastic wizardry and the plastic paradox. The second aspect I'm going to talk about is the coach as a neurochemical alchemist, okay, having really fun with emotions and neurochemistry. I'm going to introduce you to the fact that reality actually does not exist, and I can give you the science behind that, not just a bold statement. I'm going to talk to you about how do we craft transmutation and transformation as coaches. And then finally, I'm going to end with some neuro spells, some techniques and strategies that you can use to biohack your brain or share with your clients to get them to biohack their brain. So just to begin with, to share with you the meaning of the word alchemy is really a process of transformation and creation, which is truly what I believe that we're doing in coaching. We're creating processes of transformation and creation. As an alchemist, we are a person, the coach is a person that transforms something through a seemingly magical process. I'm not sure if any of you have experienced this when you're coaching, but sometimes I get to the end of a session and I go, goodness gracious, what actually happened there? I'm not even quite sure how to lock in the process that occurred, but hopefully we can bring in some of the science behind that today. And I think this really aligns with the ICF definition of coaching, where they say that coaches make a real and measurable difference in people's lives, okay, which is what an alchemist does. It's creating transformation, real and measurable differences through partnering with clients in a thought-provoking and creative process that inspires them to maximize their personal and professional potential. So I thought there was a lovely alignment between alchemy, being an alchemist, and the International Coach Federation. I'm not sure if the ICF had this in mind when they came up with their definitions. So I'm going to just begin by taking you through those 5 aspects. And at any stage, I'll stop. I'll ask if there's any questions. But as I said, please put questions in the chat. Please engage with me as I go along. I'll be really happy if we do that. We're also going to break into breakaways to have some experience of some of the things I'm going to be talking about. So just to start with, I thought I'd talk about neuroplastic wizardry and the plastic paradox. So I'm sure all of you know about neuroplasticity, okay? The understanding that the brain is not rigid and hard, that it actually is soft. And neuroplasticity refers to the process whereby our brains and nervous system can change and learn new capabilities. So it's exciting news. For me, the whole concept of neuroplasticity validates coaching. The fact that people have got the capacity to change. My 82-year-old mother always says to me, I don't know why you do this ridiculous job, because a leopard never changes its spots. Okay, my 82-year-old mom doesn't want to change. However, I know because of neuroplasticity and my own life is that a leopard certainly can change its spots, and a 40-year-old can transform their lives. Because it was when I discovered this concept of neuroplasticity at the age of 40 that I profoundly changed what I was doing for a living. I was a beauty therapist. I was a beautician up until the age of 40, never done a stitch of exercise. You've heard all the crazy things that I do now. And I started to learn about neuroscience. I only started to learn about coaching, and now I travel the world teaching people about this. So neuroplasticity, I evidence with the science, and I also evidence from my personal life as well, and hopefully continue to do so. So why did I mention the word paradox, the plastic paradox? I'm not sure if you've heard about this, because we've all heard about neuroplasticity, the fact that the brain can learn, the brain can change. But the paradox of this, we think about it as coaches in terms of positive change, because that's what we're doing. That's our job. But in actual fact, we can create any change in the brain. And it was actually a concept, this plastic paradox was a concept thought up by a writer by the name of Norman Doidge, who wrote a book called The Brain That Changes Itself. It's a fabulous book, really good. It was kind of my introduction to neuroplasticity, in fact. So Norman Doidge's concept of neuroplasticity speaks about the fact that we can change our brain for the positive. Okay, like when you give birth to your child, there's certainly positive, absolutely wondrous changes that occur in your brain. Or when your first child is born, you don't have to be giving birth to them. But at the same token, we can really change our brain for negative. And things like trauma and fear can profoundly teach our brain reactions and concepts that may not necessarily serve us. We can create our brain to be flexible and open, or we can create a brain that is rigid and closed. I mean, I feel a bit bad referencing my mother. I love her dearly, but there is a kind of rigidity to that 80-year-old concept of I do not want to change. We can change our brain to create good habits, and we create bad habits. And as you all know, it's far easier to create bad habits than it is to create good habits. We can create healthy brains, and we can create unhealthy brains, healthy ways of thinking, unhealthy ways of thinking. We can create brains that are passive, brains that are active. So this is the paradox of plasticity. It's a beautiful concept, and we've got the capacity to change, but it actually is incumbent on us as coaches about how are we creating wisdom, how are we creating possibilities that are positive and creative, accessing the wisdom and the creativity and the capacity of our clients for the good, not for limitations. So we need to be wise sorcerers when we are facilitating neuroplasticity. So thanks to Shima for putting the book in there. Johnny, I'll talk to you about why it's so much easier to create bad habits. I think we'll talk about that sort of as we go through the session, because part of what we're going to be doing is when we're wanting our clients to change, we're wanting them to change in a sustainable way, not just do something new once, and obviously in positive ways. You know, if we were creating negative change, it would be a bit weird. So how do we create that positive change, and what does it take to actually do that? So I think it's important we get all excited about the concept of neuroplasticity, and I think we should get excited about it. But what we also need to do is understand that it is our and our clients' responsibility to facilitate positive and creative and wholesome plasticity. So wisdom is the key there. So I'm going to just give you a little bit of a kind of rapid tour around the structure of your brain, not necessarily wanting to be too scientific. However, I do like to talk about the brain from a scientific and factual perspective. So if you know this, that's great. So hopefully it's just a revisit for you of some of the important structures of the brain. Remember, you have got two sides to your brain. You've got a left hemisphere and you have a right hemisphere. I'm not sure if you can see my video as well as my slides, but I'm holding not a real brain, I assure you, a brain in my hands, and the brain has got two hemispheres or two sides to it, left and right. The left and right hemispheres are almost identical. And also just to say that this model that I've got of the brain here is pretty rigid and hard. In actual fact, this plasticity concept talks about the brain being remarkably soft. So it's like one of these stress balls. I happen to have a stress brain here that is actually about as soft. That's about how soft the actual brain is. So just noticing that it's not rigid and hard. Anyway, so we have two sides to the brain, left and right, almost identical. In terms of structure, not necessarily in terms of function. So in terms of structure, one of the most important, well, actually they're all important, so I shouldn't isolate it, but one of the parts that we truly need in terms of changing behavior, setting goals, creating actions, making changes is this part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is right here behind your forehead, doesn't take up a whole lot of space. It's incredibly small in comparison to the rest of the brain, and it uses up a massive amount of resources. Your prefrontal cortex here behind your forehead is your thinking, reasoning, rational, decision-making part of your brain. Absolutely critical that we access our own prefrontal cortexes and our clients' prefrontal cortexes when we're engaging in a coaching session. But I'm going to talk to you about the limitations of this prefrontal cortex. The limbic system, and again, this is really simplifying an unbelievably complex organ, but you've probably heard of the limbic system as being the emotional brain, integrating all of this part that kind of hangs out in the middle part of your brain as the instinctive brain, the survival brain, the emotional brain, and the kind of it's reactive. It's incredibly fast processing as opposed to the prefrontal cortex, which is really slow processing. Okay, so there we go. Johnny, you magicked up. You see it indeed. We're creating alchemy today. The amygdala. And the amygdala, most of you have heard of, is a really important part of the brain. And if you have a look here, it kind of hangs out between the prefrontal cortex and this emotional, instinctive, reactive brain. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the prefrontal cortex is for. The amygdala is for. We talk about the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, the DACC. The anterior cingulate cortex is a particularly important part of the brain that is directly linked to the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system and the amygdala. The anterior cingulate cortex, you can basically think about it as being the worry center of your brain. Okay, this is the part of your brain which I think we've got many of us too active at the moment, but it's that part of the brain that decides, is this a good thing or is this not a good thing? Should I do this or should I do that? So you can see that it's kind of conflict monitoring. You know, is this right or is that right? Is this good or is this bad? And this anterior cingulate cortex is particularly important in terms of decision-making, managing emotions. So it actually integrates a lot of the limbic system and prefrontal cortex processes. Okay, and I'm going to teach you magical techniques and strategies to manage this worry center so that it's not whirring around all the time and that we can actually manage our thinking and control our limbic system so that we can take actions, move forward, and set goals. The insula, another particularly important part of the brain to do with sensing internal states. So you know that coaching is not just about logic and action. you know that coaching is about emotions. You know, coaching is about integrating meaning and purpose. And the insula can be a particularly important part because it's kind of your gut response. That's the best way, I think, to think about it. But it's any kind of internal states. And we're going to talk about how the magic of coaching is not just about action and doing, but it's also about being. And we call it interoception, which is about being aware of our internal states as well. A really important part of coaching. We talk about the nucleus accumbens, which is the part of the brain to do with hardwiring habits. Okay, nucleus accumbens, basal ganglia, habits, and the nucleus accumbens is actually, you probably heard of the neurochemical dopamine, is the dopamine producing center of the brain, extremely critical in terms of creating new habits and setting actions and goals. And then this concept of, which I'm just introducing very briefly, I could do the whole talk around it, the concept of social pain and physical pain. The fact that, and I'm not going into a lot of detail today, but we actually need to understand how important social is to our brain, how our social pain networks in our brain are mapped onto our physical pain networks. So in other words, when we experience social rejection or disrespect or unfairness, anything that is to do with a social engagement, our brain is actually mapped to respond to it as though it's a threat to our lives. So I'm going to talk today a little bit about the critical aspect of social in coaching, connection, creating relationship. Okay, we know that if there is no relationship, coaching cannot occur. Well, in my opinion, anyway, good coaching cannot occur. How do we need to create a safe communal space for our clients to be able to change their thinking, do reflections, and take actions? So this whole concept of social pain and physical pain in the brain, really important. And then where are we? The hippocampus. So the hippocampus, also hidden right deep in the limbic system, is the part of the brain to do with long-term memory. I love to get a little picture in my brain, because that's the way the brain likes to remember things, of all these hippos running around a university campus. And that's how I remember that it's long-term memory. You can memorizing all the things that they need to learn. Hippocampus particularly important because we want to embed new habits into long-term memory. We want to also access long-term memory when we manifesting creativity for our clients. I'm not sure if I'll have much time to talk about that. And now what I just want to mention is the really important and it's something that we really need to understand around the brain and around our clients is what is the impact of any threat on our brain, okay, and how dramatic that impact of any kind of external threat, whether it's a physical threat to the brain, okay, remember physical, social, emotional, very much linked, or whether it's a social threat, or whether it's a trauma, grief, bereavement, loss, any negative experience. We're going to talk about what is the impact on the brain of those negative experiences. Don't underestimate what happens in the external world can profoundly change not only the structure, but certainly the functioning of the brain. Okay, so that was a quick whirlwind tour through your structure of your brain. Are there any questions at this stage? Anyone got any questions?
If you have any questions, please share it in the chat box. I'm just looking at the questions that people entered when they were registering to see if there's anything on this part. Okay. I think one question might be relevant at this stage. How does the brain rewire from trauma? Is that something you want to cover now or maybe later?
Sure. So what we have to understand is what is the impact of trauma on the brain? And what happens when we are, and I'm going to talk a bit about that, when we are actually experiencing a traumatic event, remember how do you respond to that is in the moment. You react to a traumatic event. You don't process it and think about it and figure out logically what is going on. So the entire limbic system is active and responsive to any kind of trauma. And remember, the hippocampus is buried deep inside your limbic system. So the problem with what happens when you have a traumatic event, it burns itself into your hippocampus, into your long-term memory, and literally changes the brain profoundly. It also changes memories of events. So I'm not talking, I mean, I've done a lot of talks on trauma and grief and the impact on the brain. But what we have to understand is that it's absolutely critical to do work with the prefrontal cortex to rewire those memories of the event, because when it's burnt into your brain in the way that a trauma burns into your brain, there's no logic, there's no reasoning, there's just pure dramatic experience, and it can have long-term damaging effects. Okay, I'm talking about it very lightly. We'll talk a little bit about the flight and freeze. Suchismita?
Yep, you can call me Suchi. That's easier.
Suchi. Okay, Suchi, thank you. I'm usually very good with Indian names, but clearly not today. And I'm going to talk exactly about that because it's very important when we talk about structure, and then fight or flight or freeze versus thinking, rational reasoning. Okay, I'll come into that, but I first want to just mention a bit of neurochemistry. Arvind, when we talk about plasticity, which part of the brain are we referring to? I think maybe that's actually what I should have said, Arvind, right at the beginning. We're actually referring to the entire brain. Okay, and we're not only referring to structure, but we're also referring to function as well, how the brain works, and also actual structures of the brain. So, Arvind, for example, okay, this amygdala, let me just talk about the amygdala for a moment. This amygdala is the part of the brain that is always super present for any kind of danger that can arise, and has the job really of readying our bodies, our minds, our responses for action when we are in danger. Okay, so for example, Arvind, when a person is under a lot of threat, so for example, a soldier who's on the battlefield, or a child who is in a abusive environment, the amygdala actually grows bigger and bigger and bigger. In fact, soldiers on the battlefield and children in abusive homes, their amygdalas completely resemble each other, which is quite frightening. And that's neuroplasticity of the amygdala. And then in terms of functioning, whenever and Srini, I'm going to go into exactly that. The chemical actions of the brain, neuroplasticity can also be facilitated there. So any part of your brain can grow or shrink. I mean, so much to the extent that, you know, all the research that's been done on Einstein's brain, that he actually had a bump on his parietal lobe, the top of his brain here, which is the part to do with sensory motor processing, because he was processing 3D, 4D interpretation. He was using that part of the brain. I mean, maybe that's a bit of a long shot for me to say that, but they find that an artist has a stronger, thicker, denser visual cortex, which is here at the back of the brain. Somebody who's doing a lot of logical processing, decision-making work will have a thicker and denser prefrontal cortex. So in actual, Arvind, any part of your brain. And Arvind, I have something that I always say: if you're using your brain to complain and whine and gossip, that is what you're growing in your brain. Whereas if you were using your brain for decision-making, managing impulses, and setting meaningful goals, then that is what you're growing in your brain. So, Arvind, I always say that you are the architect of the structure of the brain, and you are the painter of the neurochemical processes. Okay, Srini, so let me go there. That was a good point. And Sushi, I'll come back to your fight or flight in a second, because I need to talk a little bit about neurochemicals. So this is my second mark on alchemy and neurochemistry and coaching, is that we are neurochemical alchemists. And what do I mean by this? Okay, so the brain functions off electrical chemical activity. So what you have here in this GIF is you had these little electrical impulses that pass down the extension of one brain cell towards the extension of another brain cell. Bearing in mind, you've got approximately 100 billion brain cells in your brain, and each brain cell has got approximately 10,000 possible connections to any other brain cell. So you've got what's it, 300 trillion possible connections in your brain, and constantly there are electrical impulses that are being produced. That is how we create neural pathways in our brain. And if you have a look in this GIF, in between all of those neural pathways, the brain is awash with neurochemicals. We've got plus or minus 100 neurochemicals in our brain. Okay. And by the way, you've also heard the term neurotransmitters or neuroinhibitors. Those are neurochemicals. You've heard the term neurohormones. Those are neurochemicals. There's just different terminology. So some of the common ones that I'm going to mention today in terms of our alchemy, one is dopamine, which is your excitement, motivating, that really intense joy and pleasure neurochemical. Serotonin is your mood neurochemical. Okay, oxytocin, many of you may have heard of. We emit oxytocin when we are in physical presence with other human beings. Okay, by the way, even your pet dog, because you think your pet dog is a human being, even though it's not, and you will emit oxytocin in the presence of your pet dog. Okay, but mostly it is given off with a breastfeeding mother and her baby. And oxytocin is a neurotransmitter. It supports the transmission of those electrical impulses. Learning cannot occur when oxytocin is not present. So can you see the importance of social engagement? I think it's a huge problem. I mean, I'm so grateful that I'd rather be in Mumbai, but at least I can do this virtually. But the power of me doing an in-person talk would be much more profound because we would have oxytocin presence. Adrenaline, I'm sure many of you have heard of, and there's your Sushi, there's your fight-flight neurochemical. It's often referred to. People also refer to it as epinephrine and norepinephrine, in case you hear those terms, but we're basically talking about adrenaline. And then cortisol. So obviously I'm just taking a selection of neurochemicals. Cortisol is basically your stress neurochemical. Now, the interesting thing here is cortisol is a neural inhibitor. Okay, in other words, it actually stops that electrical impulse passing down the extension of the neurons. And so therefore it stops you from learning. It stops you from thinking. So just make the connection here. If you are stressed, if you are anxious, if you are fearful, if you are worried, you've got an outpouring of cortisol in your system. And what happens is it stops you from thinking. Thinking does not occur when we are under extreme stress. Okay, so basic neurochemistry, I'll mention some other neurochemicals as we go along. And just to answer you, Sushi, I didn't create the slide in this last minute. It happened to be here, but let's have a look at what happens. Oh, I love this quote. You'll hear that I'm going to refer to that book, that Harry Potter book, The Philosopher's Stone, where J.K. Rowling talks about alchemy. And she says, I never wanted to be a witch, but an alchemist. Now that's a different matter. I just thought that was a really great quote. Okay, so Sushi, let's go with your fight or flight. So we have these two parts of our brain. And remember, I'm simplifying a really complex organ, okay? So we got limbic system versus, versus thinking, okay? Prefrontal cortex, limbic system. So basically, your brain is always, it's almost like a seesaw. You're almost seesawing between either threat, which is reactive, okay, which is very fast and instinctive and easy to trigger, and reward, which is slower processing, prefrontal cortex. Remember I said the prefrontal cortex is incredibly resource intensive. It processes really slowly. Okay, so I know I could talk at 70 million miles an hour, and I probably already do, but you wouldn't take in a word I said, because that prefrontal cortex, especially when it's new information, is a slow processor. Okay, so we've got limbic system versus prefrontal cortex. Fast is the reactions, slow is the thinking. Our limbic system, our instinctive brain, reacts rapidly versus our thinking brain responds, and that takes time. Okay, the default mode network, default is like what is automatic, is your limbic system, unconscious, subconscious brain. Task positive network is your thinking, rational, reasoning brain, okay, which is much slower. Can you see what we're fighting when we're coaching people? That all of that instinctive, reactive, survival, reflexive processes are so easy to access, as opposed to our reflective, thinking, positive, task-orientated, responsive network. Okay, so we're talking about, and I'm talking about it as if it's either or, but it's kind of like a bit of a seesaw effect, that we either in one or the other. And the more threat there is, the less reward we feel. The more we're reacting, the less we are responding. The more we're in automatic, the less we're in thoughtful, productive, conscious goal setting. Okay, so we kind of talking about these two as either or, but it's a bit of a seesaw effect. And then, Sushi, what happens when we get a big fright? Okay, our brain automatically readies itself for action, absolutely instinctively and automatically. And Parna, let me speak to you about quickly here about what actually happens in the brain when we get a big fright, when we're stressed out, when we have anxiety, when we feel like there's any threat in our environment. So what happens is this amygdala, which is, remember, hanging out right here between prefrontal cortex and limbic system, always alert, along with the anterior cingulate cortex, always alert for anything that could possibly go wrong. So in that moment, when the saber-toothed tiger jumps out in front of me, what happens is my amygdala sends a message down my spinal cord to my adrenal glands and releases adrenaline into the system. Okay, too much adrenaline is when I get a big fright, when I get angry, when something threatens me, I get too much adrenaline. Why am I saying too much? Because we've always got adrenaline. If you had no adrenaline, you'd be dead. So it's good to have a balance of adrenaline, but too much adrenaline, okay, what it does is it stimulates cortisol. Cortisol and adrenaline flood the system. I disengage my thinking brain. Remember, cortisol is a neural inhibitor. Disengage my thinking brain, and I respond from this automatic, instinctive, reactive part of the brain. And that is exactly, Sushi, sorry, I keep saying your name, but don't regret having made a comment. I'm excited that you do. That results in what we call the fight, flight, freeze response. Okay, that is what people commonly know as the fight, flight, freeze response. Okay, the function of adrenaline in alchemy is that we want a balanced amount of adrenaline. If we have too much adrenaline, okay, we are fight, flighting, and freezing. If we got no adrenaline, we're dead. Okay, the faint, flock, please are other responses. Faint is sometimes when people are faced with a terrible threat. Sometimes they just pass clean out. The flock response is we scream for help. And the please response is you try to placate the attacker. It's okay, here you can have my computer, have my cell phone, etc. So these responses are fast, automatic, threat responses. They cause us to react. The default mode network is the DMN is default mode network, which is automatic, okay, non-thinking. Task positive network is thinking, reasoning. Okay, we're not reasoning when the saber-tooth tiger jumps out in front of me. We are reacting. Okay, so so these are the responses that are unbelievably automatic and instinctive. Okay, now here, when Arvind, I'm talking about, oh, somebody else was saying, what is, Sunita was saying, what is the amygdala hijack? Sunita, can you see? That is exactly what an amygdala hijack is. Okay, and Johnny, sort of going back to your comment of why is it easier to create bad habits, is the principle of how our brain works is that we have a very strong negativity bias in our brain. Okay, we are much more biased to the saber-toothed tiger than to the nice juicy berries. Okay, because the saber-toothed tiger jumps out in front of me, I'm going to be dead. Okay, whereas the nice juicy berries are still going to be there the next day. So we have this strong negativity bias in our brain. You're going to see it with your clients. You're going to see them automatically and instinctively respond in a much stronger way to things that are negative than to things that are positive, because that is what the brain is designed to do. Okay, it serves us when I'm out in the savannah saving saber-tooth tigers. It serves me when I'm walking down the street and suddenly the bus is headed in my direction. But it doesn't serve me when I'm trying to set goals, when I'm trying to change my behavior, when I'm trying to access thoughtful responses. This bias, and why I've got 5 little smiley faces there is because the bias in our brain is 5 to 1. We need 5 positive experiences to every 1 negative in order to balance it. Can you see why it's so important to create a positive neurochemical state for our clients? And I can tell you how easy it is to change somebody's neurochemistry. I'm going to demonstrate it for you right now. Okay, I'd like you all to think about a person that you really dislike, somebody who's betrayed you, somebody who's been rude to you, somebody who's just unpleasant. If you haven't got somebody like that in your life, then I want to be you. Okay, think about somebody who really you dislike, a negative person in your life. Okay, now immediately what will be happening in your brain and even your body? You'll start to feel your heart beating slightly. Your breathing will become a little bit rapid. You might find that you get a slight heating of your body and you find a layer of sweat on your skin just by thinking about somebody that is negative, especially if it's somebody that has hurt you or insulted you or is currently causing pain. Okay, now before you all get depressed, I'd like you to think about somebody that you love, somebody that brings you joy, somebody that brings you pleasure. And immediately your adrenaline will drop and your serotonin and your dopamine, your positive neurochemicals will rise. That is how easy it is to change a person's neurochemistry. And that is neurochemical alchemy. I'm sure you've seen it with your clients. By the way, you'll see now, this is not about saying, oh, everything's blue sky and wonderful and okay. We face reality as coaches. But when we say to people, how can we address this? What would be a win-win as opposed to a win-lose? How can you change your perspective of this to be empowering rather than disempowering? What we're doing is you're literally changing a person's neurochemistry from reactive, defensive, instinctive into thoughtful and task positive, so that they can be conscious, be constructive, and be thoughtful and move forward. Okay, so faint and flock, Mohan, you don't have to get too caught up in it. I love the detail of it. Faint is like in a real life, not a traumatic experience, but like when your boss is being rude to you, sometimes people just blank out. Okay, or when the I don't know, you're in a meeting and the leader says, please stand up and do your presentation, and you haven't done a presentation. Or you know what has happened in real life? You start your presentation 5 minutes before the webinar starts, and suddenly most of the pictures have disappeared out of your presentation. Tashima, you're smiling, because guys, guess what happened to me 5 minutes before today's presentations? There was about 7 minutes, Tashima. Okay, that those negative neurochemicals were flying all over the place in my brain. And I had to use every ounce of what I know about mindfulness and presence and neuroscience to bring my prefrontal cortex back into play, because my limbic system, I nearly fainted, in fact, Mohan.
Yeah, that was the amygdala hijack in practice we saw.
That was a first for me as well, Anuradha. And that's why you'll notice some of my slides are a little bit blank because the pictures have gone. Okay, but anyway, bear with me here. So I'm now flocking. Okay, so Mohan, you asked about what happens in faint and flock. I'm now flocking. I'm asking for your sympathy and for your help as I go forward with the presentation. Okay. Is the protective instinct in action which leads to negativity bias? Sushi, absolutely. That is, it's us protecting ourselves. I need to be very defensive about something that's going to threaten me, and not so quickly defensive and reactive about something that is good for me. Okay. I've lost all sense of time. How much longer have we got, Tashima, if you don't mind? I'm fully engaged in.
Colleen, we have 37 minutes.
Okay. So I'm going to stop. I love taking and I'm going to come to habits. And I'll talk to you, Anuradha, about why the bad habits serve us. But let me keep going, because otherwise I'm going to run out of time, and I've got some lovely stuff to share. Okay, so we're understanding these two parts of our brains. Let's come to the third. Engage still in neurochemical alchemy. All of you, I am absolutely sure, have come across the iceberg model. Okay, the model of human behavior that is used in cognitive behavioral psychology to understand how people function. And how this model works, if you haven't heard of it, then this is an absolutely essential and critical part of your coaching training and your coaching processing, is that our beliefs, okay, who we are, determine our thinking. Our thinking determines our emotions, and our emotions determine our behavior and results. So a lot of people think that emotions are not important, okay? That we need to be emotionless. A lot of people think that coaching is all about performance and logic. That is top of the behavior, top of the iceberg perspective, okay? As transformational coaches, as neurochemical alchemists, we work underneath the level of the water. We work at the level of emotions, thinkings, beliefs, and identity. Okay, why are emotions important? We have emotions. We are human beings. That means we are emotional beings. Okay, too many of us, our cultures, our schooling systems, the parenting we've had that said, don't be emotional, don't get upset, don't be angry, don't be. We told how not to feel all the time, but as human beings, we are emotional beings. And why are emotions important? Because they help us survive. If I didn't care about the saber-toothed tiger, I wouldn't run for the hills when I saw it. It helps us connect. It helps us communicate. Can you imagine if I presented this presentation like this? You would be absolutely bored. The fact that I'm passionate and excited and emotional engages your brains. And also, the emotions are critical for decision making. If you have no emotions, okay, and this has happened, people have had the emotional part of their brain damaged, okay, people become pathologically indecisive. And emotions are critical for memory. That hippocampus is wrapped around by your limbic system, wrapped around by the emotional brain. You remember things that are emotional. And so therefore, as coaches, we leverage emotions, we acknowledge emotions, we use emotions to drive results and behavior. My favorite saying in South Africa, which is where I come from, is if we had not got angry about apartheid, we would not have changed an unjust system. Okay, so anger is not bad, it's what you do with it. I don't want you invalidating your client's negative emotions or so-called negative emotions. What we do is we help them leverage. We help them navigate and integrate negative emotions to create positive and powerful reactions and behavior. Okay, so where am I going next? I'm going next to a slide that disappeared, I think. Okay, this is another one that disappeared, so we'll just ignore it for now. I talked about emotions, accepting, validating, and integrating. And now I'm going to talk to you about the third alchemical principle, which is reality actually doesn't exist. Okay. I actually need about 3 hours for this one. So let me just whiz through the fact that reality doesn't exist. So if this is your brain, okay, this triangle here is your brain. Let me use a pen. Okay, that is your brain. Here is your prefrontal cortex. That is how tiny your thinking, rational, reasoning, conscious brain is. So how is your brain designed to process? Is as much as possible goes into your thinking brain and is hardwired into your subconscious and unconscious. Everything that we do, okay, is hardwired into our subconscious and unconscious brain. That is habits. By the way, everything is a habit. The way you walk is a habit. The way you talk is a habit. When you drive your car, you don't have to think about changing gears and pushing in clutches. You just drive your car. As you become masterful in coaching, hopefully you're not having to figure out what question to ask and where you should go. Hopefully it's become part of your subconscious and unconscious being. Now, the problem is whatever is in your subconscious and unconscious brain, which is your entire life, your conditioning, your life experiences, the parenting that you've had, only a part of it is nature, but much more of it is nurture. This conditioned experiences rise. Where's my pen? Rise. Okay, I haven't got a pen. Wait, let me get one quickly. Rise like scum to the surface and become part of your thinking, reasoning brain. So when you say, I can't do maths, I can't sing, I can't dance, I don't get on with anybody, that rises to the surface and becomes your reality. So when you try to do maths, you can't do it. When you try to dance, you can't. Okay, whatever it is that you are wiring into your brain becomes your reality. One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I'm doing work with the ICF chapters in both Russia, which I know they said they've closed, they haven't, and in the Ukraine. And you better believe there are two different realities that are existing. There is no such thing as reality, only your perception of reality. And my favorite quote by Einstein, reality is an illusion, albeit a really persistent one. So all you have control over is your iceberg. That is it, your iceberg. Okay, reality is here on the sea floor. Okay, but what are we doing? We're always thinking about, he said this, and that person did that, and Russia invaded Ukraine, and COVID-19 has affected me. We focus on this reality that it doesn't even really exist anyway. That's where we focus, and that's how we disempowered. Our job as coaches is to help the client focus on their thinking, on their brain. You know that concept. This is that concept of coach the person, not the problem. Okay, the problem is reality, which is not real anyway. It's only their perception of the problem. So don't coach that reality. Don't coach the fact that they've been fired. Don't coach the fact that they're finding it difficult to create a loving relationship. Don't coach the fact that they, I don't know what, have lost, I don't know, confidence. Okay, don't coach that. Coach their thinking, their feelings, and their beliefs about themselves and the world, because it's the brain that you're coaching. It's not reality. And then the last one, because I want to go into an action and because I need to save a little bit of time for my neuro spells at the end, is transmutation and transformation. So transmutation is an alchemy word. Isn't it beautiful? I absolutely love it. It's a word that means the act of or process of changing something completely, especially into something different. Isn't that what we're doing? We're transforming people. We're not therapists. We're not to say that therapy doesn't transform, but we're not therapists. We're not having conversations about and detailed conversations about problems. We're helping people think and change. That is your job as a coach. Okay, so thanks for all the lovely comments there, and Maria, especially yours. So the act of transformation and the act of transmutation brings me to my magical wand of neurochemistry and how do we do this. So again, I don't want to overpower you with scientific facts and names, but I think we don't understand how people change behavior. This is your part, Anuradha, to do with habits, good habits and bad habits. Okay, so there are 5 critical neurochemicals when we're changing habits or changing behaviors. And the number 1 and number 2 are 2 of the habits, the neurochemicals that people often forget, or the aspects of transformation that people often forget. So now remember, norepinephrine is adrenaline, okay? Epinephrine, norepinephrine, adrenaline, and that's energy. And that's agitation. Remember, a lot of adrenaline is produced when a person is under threat. Okay, now why am I saying it? You don't want to create a threatening state to for your clients, but if a person wants to change, they need to have some level of agitation and stress. If there's no level, if I'm just completely happy and going along and everything's fine, I'm not going to change. So that's why in coaching, we say, what do you want more of? What do you want less of? What is not okay in your life? Okay, what is going to happen if you don't take charge of your emotions? What is the impact going to be on your family if you don't look after your health? We're taught mostly to only focus on the positive, but sometimes we need to create that sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency, by the way, if that is there, and it's not always negative, it can also be a positive sense of urgency. Because remember, when you get very excited about something, you get a lot of adrenaline as well. But when you create that sense of urgency, plasticity, the rate and the magnitude of plasticity is dramatically enhanced. Okay, so we need to get that sense of urgency. Okay, we need to create discomfort in order for people to shift. And the second neurochemical is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is the neurochemical that is produced when you're paying attention. When you're focusing on something, you produce acetylcholine. Okay, and this marks the brain for change. Change doesn't happen when we are just responding or reacting. Change happens when we focus our attention in a particular direction. And the rate and the magnitude of plasticity is increased with norepinephrine, but it is triggered by neuroplasticity. I mean, by acetylcholine. Okay. And it can be really robust, the production of acetylcholine, if the norepinephrine, which is either love or fear, okay, excitement or anticipation, are adequately produced. And then what happens is we require dopamine. Dopamine is reward. Okay, if there was no dopamine, we wouldn't engage in different behavior. And that's, Anuradha, your answer for the why do we engage in bad habits? Because when I eat 3 sugar donuts, I get a lot of dopamine. Okay, but I haven't created the sense of urgency to not eat the donuts. I haven't focused on the fact that I can control my my brain in order to not eat the donuts. I'm just going for the dopamine. Okay, we require focused attention on what do we want to change, why is it important, and then what is the reward we're getting. Okay, if there is no reward for changing your behavior, you're not going to change your behavior. Glutamate and GABA are 2 interesting neurochemicals. It's basically your on and off switch. Okay, your GABA is your calming neurochemical. Okay, when people are agitated, too irritated, too overwhelmed, they're not going to change behavior. We need to calm the brain down. And glutamate is the excitatory, the on switch. So we kind of navigating between glutamate and GABA. Both of these are quite important in sleep as well, but I won't go there. We haven't got time. And then oxytocin. Remember I said learning occurs when oxytocin is present. It binds neurochemicals. So basically, our brain in transformation is we are alchemists of neurochemicals transformation. We're changing the way the chemistry works in the brain. So I know this is might sounding very high level. So I've got an activity for you to do. So if we can just get ready to open the breakaway
Breakout
room.
rooms. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'll
thanks.
do
And
that.
I'm going to
I'll-
give them the process first before we do that. Okay.
There's a
And
question
just-
before that, Colleen. Sorry.
yes,
There's
yes,
a
yes.
question in the chat box about NLP. Do you want to take that now or later?
I don't want to take it ever, actually, because although I love NLP, it's not neuroscience. It is not based in neuroscience. It was pre the discoveries we know about the brain now, but it's a fabulous coaching process. And I think it really leverages many of these neuroscientific principles, but as a process, it's not based in neuroscience itself. Okay, so I love it, but I'm not going to engage with it right now. Forgive me, Benet. Okay. So Sushi wanted to say about 4, create an environment that produces 4. That's what we're going to do now here, right? This is the practice, and I'll come to CBT as well, Benet. This is the process of change. This is what needs to be in place in order for your clients to change a habit. If you want to change a habit, these 6 things need to be in place. Okay. Hopefully what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to share my screen to the breakout rooms. I'm sure we can do that. Otherwise, take a screenshot of this, take a photograph of this, and take it into your breakout rooms, because you're just going to have about 10 minutes to have a conversation around this. So if you want to change any habits, okay, first of all, you have to want to change the habit. Remember my 82-year-old mother, she does not want to change, and therefore she's not going to change. So you have to want to change, okay? And wanting to is norepinephrine, that sense of urgency. Then you need to pay attention to what is it that I'm going to change. If you don't practice the new behavior and pay attention to the new behavior, you're not going to change it. Be mindful of what do you need to do in order to change. That is acetylcholine. Then you need to repeat the behavior, glutamate and GABA, switch it on, okay, and activate the new behavior. Remind and reinforce, that is your dopamine, okay? There needs to be positive reward in order for behavior change to happen. If there's no positive reward, you're not going to sustain the behavior change. Relationship, okay, you know what it's like. If you have a group that you're meeting to go for a run tomorrow morning, I don't know about you, I'm not going to miss it because I know they're all going to be talking about me, so I better go. But if you've got a partner, connections, social connections, truly enhances habit change. Get a buddy, a challenge buddy with whatever it is that you're wanting to change. And then interestingly enough, rest, which also would take me a long time to explain, the GABA component, learning occurs when you rest. Okay, so rest is an important part of triggering new habits. Okay, so may I hand back to Shima over to you, and we can give 10 minutes. Just discuss what is a habit that you want to change, and how can you use the 6-step war? How can you go to war for changing a habit using the neurochemistry that we've described here? Great. Welcome back. I found my wizard hat, so I thought I'd wear that for the rest of the session. And unfortunately, I haven't got time to debrief on that activity. I really apologize. I think I got overwhelmed by the loss of my slides or some of the pictures on my slides, and also the I'm so excited by the topic, and I know you want to see the magic spells, which is why I kind of put my hats on as well. So apologies for not debriefing on that experience. Let's just go into the magic spells. I'm also happy to stay on for a little while afterwards. Okay, so I have 10 spells for you for how you can biohack your brain. And I'm just going to go through them really quickly, and then we'll complete, and then I'll hand back to Tashima. So you might have heard of nootropics. Nootropics are really cognitive enhancers. Now, I'm not a great fan of taking external substances to stimulate certain chemicals or processes in the brain unless it is absolutely necessary, because when we're taking external substances, we set up imbalances in the brain. However, there's some that are are better than others. There's some that are entirely necessary, like nootropic. There are pharmaceutical interventions for people, prescription interventions, people who suffer from Alzheimer's, ADHD, clinical depression, okay, can change cognitive processing. Caffeine is pretty good for your brain. Caffeine enhances acetylcholine, so you can use it. Don't use too much of it though, because then there's too much, the epinephrine. You don't want too much of that. Adaptogens, which are stress, help you adapt to stress. Ashwagandha is quite a well-known one at the moment. Ginkgo biloba, you might have heard of. Ginseng, qualia. So I'm not a great fan of external substances. I prefer you to get your substances within your nutrition, okay, but much better for the brain. And then, of course, there's a huge topic, which maybe I'm going to address at some stage, because I think we need to, on psychedelics and the impact of psychedelics on the brain. And what are psychedelics? Really popular at the moment. A lot of neuroscientists are engaging with it, talking about it. I'm not saying that I'm promoting it in any way, shape, or form, but psychedelics allow you to bring aspects of your mind that are normally inaccessible to you to conscious thought. So these are things like using ketamine, using psilocybin, MDMA, etc. Metacognition is a technique that we use in coaching. It's like a spell. When you say to somebody, have a look at this problem, have a look at yourself responding to this problem, and see what is actually going on. When you take a person out of their brain and they get them to look at it from a meta perspective, it is an unbelievably powerful way to shift the person's thinking. Space-time bridging, really interesting as well, because this whole concept of setting a goal, and is the goal too far in the future? So space-time bridging, it's spoken about by my favorite neuroscientist, who's Andrew Huberman, who talks about creating that internal interoception. What do I want? What do I need? What's important to me? How am I feeling and what needs to change? Interoception. And then exteroception, which is the future. How can I achieve that? What is it I want to achieve? Okay. And then linking the past, the present, and linking the future with timelined actions, strategic processes, measurable checks along the way to make sure that we reach the goal. And doing those three things frequently with your clients, very powerful. Breathing, really powerful process to either stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, or calm the sympathetic nervous system. Basically, if you breathe in short and you breathe out long, you calm the stress system. If you breathe in long and you breathe out short, you excite the nervous system. So depending on what you're wanting to do, you want to get excited or you want to calm. Mostly, I think we want to calm. So it's breathing in long, breathing in short, breathing out long. Extremely powerful. Cold therapy is kind of a fad at the moment. It's a thing. I'm crazy about it. I have a cold shower every morning, and you just use mindfulness, just use breathing techniques. And what it does is it produces a massive amount of dopamine after that experience of cold. And not only that, it builds resilience, because you learn that you can navigate and you can process through difficult experiences. So I'm doing 2 minutes of cold showers every morning. I never thought I'd be doing it in my life, but it's really powerful if you use your breathing and you use your mindfulness being present, obviously. Your cognitive behavioral strategies, things like reappraisal, things like gratitude journals, using practical strategies to hack your brain. Hypnosis, I'm also crazy about hypnosis in many ways. I think as a coach, I definitely use so many hypnotic principles, like speaking to people in a way that is calm and you're wanting them to calm, getting them to picture and vision what it is that they're wanting to, and then experiencing it in the moment. So this is not some woo-woo weird process. It's soundly based in neuroscience. Helping people have routines and rituals for that practice, for that rehearsal process. Having a routine Like, for example, every single day of my life, I exercise. It's part of my routine. I don't have to worry about it. It's not a choice of whether I do or don't. So having routines and having certain rituals, I sit and write in my gratitude journal every day. Having those rituals, just take the effort of having to think something through. And then last of all, vision. We know how important vision is. Remember, when you're picturing something, okay, when you're visioning what success looks like, when you are visioning yourself crossing, standing up and doing a presentation in front of 1,000 people, what your brain is doing is actually rehearsing exactly what it is that you're doing. So using vision boards, mantras, affirmations are a powerful way to get your brain, to hack your brain. So I could come up with 100 other neuro spells, and perhaps I'm going to do that at one of these stages. But just to complete today, I hope I'm not taking up too much time. When you want something, all the universe will conspire in helping you to achieve it. From The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. And lastly, I talk about The Alchemist, Paulo Coelho's book, and Harry Potter's Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone was an alchemical substance. Firstly, you have got a personal legend, okay, and that is your elixir of youth. You're living your purpose, living your meaning. That is what The Alchemist teaches you. Fear and limiting beliefs hold you back. And from Harry Potter, stay away from three-headed dogs, stay away from real fears. But your fear of what if I can't, what if this happens, are not real fears. They're not three-headed dogs. And the last one, fall 7 times and get up 8 times. Okay, isn't that a magnificent principle? And the principle from Harry Potter, don't be afraid to ask for help. Thank you, everyone. It's been a great privilege to be here today. Thanks to Shima and Anuradha.
Marvelous, Colleen. I think it's been such a engaging session, and I've actually written it in the chat that I think I'm going to listen to the recording one more time and absorb all the beautiful nuggets that you've shared today. And I wanted to ask you, Colleen, and I'm going to do this in front of everyone. Do you have an extra 10-15 minutes that
Yes.
you would want to stay back? Because unfortunately, we've just hit the time that we have with us, and there haven't been enough interactions with Q&A, and we do have a 15-minute extra time with our audience for sharing and Q&A. So if you are game, we'll be really delighted to kind of extend it.
Okay, so just are you
and
okay?
Before we do that, I will officially thank Colleen. Thank you so much, Colleen, for all that you've done for us today. And I'm sure we have so much more to learn from you, because today's session was so insightful. And I won't be surprised if the next team of the learning management actually is tempted to call you for the 3rd time, because there is so much more that we could continue to learn from you and absorb. Because each of the slides that you had, some of them were mega topics which you could again spend full sessions on. So thank you so much for doing that.